Welcome to the Ask Brad Show. Be prepared to hear ideas, concepts, and strategies that may challenge the way you were taught to think about saving and investing for retirement. It's time to roll up our sleeves and get to it. And now, the host of the Ask Brad Show, here's Brad Williams.
Today I have a special guest, and that is David McCurry. He's a partner in Brodowski & McCurry. And David's focus is estate planning. And today we're going to talk about what impact that the new tax bill is going to have on estate planning. Now, I want to clarify something for my listeners. A lot of people, when they hear that term estate planning, they think, well, I don't need to do that because that's just for the really rich. Well, that's not necessarily the case. If you have assets of any reasonable measure, then you need to be looking at estate planning to make sure those assets get passed to who you want them to go to in the most tax efficient way possible. So, David, again, I appreciate you coming on the show. We're going to talk about the Tax Cut and Job Act. So tell me what you get mainly from that new bill. What do you see happening?
The main thing, with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, at least as it relates to estate planning, the big change was it doubled the estate gift and generation skipping tax to $11.2 million, meaning that if you have more than $11.2 million, there's going to be a potential tax, for a transfer that occurs during life or upon death. Previously, this exemption amount was $5.6 million. So it doubled it from $5.6 million to $11.2 million. So there's a lot less estates now that are going to have a potential tax problem.
And that's really quite an improvement because, when you think about illiquid things like family farms and businesses that may be asset rich but cash poor, and then they end up having problems when an owner dies that hasn't done an estate plan that causes a liquidity crisis. And so what I'm hearing from you is that with the new changes in the estate tax, there's going to be a lot less instances of that happening.
Certainly. Yeah, there's going to be a lot less businesses or family farms that have to be sold now with this change. Now, there is a catch. The catch is you have to die, of course, from an estate tax perspective to have this law apply to you. And this law is set to sunset December 31st of 2025. So from a planning standpoint, if you have an estate that has a potential tax problem, one thing that you could consider doing if you plan on living past 2025 is plan to gift assets during that time period or prior to Congress changing the law to take advantage of the law while it's in effect.
And, David, as I meet with clients, and I've been doing this over 30 years, one of the biggest misunderstandings about gifting is the whole process. Why don't you just, in a quick synopsis, explain to my audience what you mean when you say gifting?
Gifting is, while you're alive, transferring title of ownership of assets to another person. And that other person could be children, grandchildren, spouses. It could also be trusts or LLCs or corporations that are not owned by the person making the transfer.
All right. That's good. And another question that often comes up is they hear the term gift tax and clarify who pays that.
The gift tax is actually paid by the person making the gift, called the donor. It's not paid by the person that's receiving the gift or the donee. So whoever's making the gift has the responsibility of paying any gift taxes associated with that gift.
I appreciate you clarifying that because that is a question I get oftentimes when I tell people that. They look at me funny like, wait a minute, I'm getting the money, but he's having to pay the tax or she's having to pay. And that's just the way it is. I would like to make an offer to all our listeners now. I've got a key financial data, which is basically a tax cheat sheet for many aspects of this new tax bill that a lot of my clients have found very helpful. And I'd be happy to get that to you. No cost, no obligation. If you'll just call 844-343-6048, we can either get that emailed out to you as a digital copy or a hard copy. If you'd like, we've got a real nice laminated copy. But that's no cost, no obligation. 844-343-6048. All right, David, let's get back to it. And tell me what opportunities people have in this new tax bill that they didn't have before.
Yeah, well, gifts is the main advantage for the larger estates. Making a gift while we have this $11.2 million exemption amount prior to the law expiring or Congress changing the law. And some people may be hesitant to make a gift of a large amount of money outright to children or to spouses. So there's ways that you can make gifts in a trust. One trust that comes to mind is a spousal lifetime access trust, where you make a transfer of assets for your spouse's benefit. And the spouse can use the assets that you've transferred, millions of dollars. Spouse can use those assets for his or her health, education, or maintenance. So it's there if it's needed for spouse's benefit, but you're also locking in the gift exemption amount, that large transfer of assets. You're taking advantage of the law while it's still the law.
Okay. And so I guess where a good example to use would be it allows you to give that to the kids, but have spouse access to it for their maintenance.
Certainly. Or the gift could be to spouse and kids, or just to kids, or just to spouse. Okay. It could be held in a trust as opposed to given outright to those individuals. So that way there's more control. The person making the gift can control the terms, of the access to the trust. And also it's protected. If you leave it in an irrevocable trust, there's some potential asset protection benefits of that gift. Assets held in trust may not be subject to a creditor that a person has if they're in a car wreck and sued.
Sure.
Or if they file bankruptcy, or if there's a divorce that occurs. If a child marries somebody and they wind up in divorce court, assets can be more protected in a trust form as opposed to making the gift outright to the spouse or to the child.
Yeah. And one question I get a lot is, on second marriages, they want to take care of their present spouse, but they don't want the money to go to that present spouse's children. They want it to go to their children, but they want to take care of their present spouse while they're alive. And so tell me how that applies. Tell our audience how that applies.
Certainly. This is another good use of an irrevocable trust where, if let's just say husband wants to take care of wife if he passes away first, and a lot of times he'll leave assets in an irrevocable trust, that wife can use the assets for the rest of her life for her health, education, or maintenance of her lifestyle. And also if there's a house that's part of the trust.
Okay.
The husband can give the right to use and occupy that residence for the rest of a wife's life. That way, husband's children can't remove her from the house. She has a right to live there for the rest of her life. So husband takes care of wife during her lifetime, but upon her death, if it's an irrevocable trust that husband has created for wife, then he can set it up so that the beneficiaries cannot be changed by wife after her death. So husband can guarantee that whatever assets, the family house or the family farm that's in this trust, whatever monies are not used for supporting wife during her lifetime, it goes back to his kids from a previous marriage, as opposed to having wife have the potential to leave the assets to her kids. And
divorce the original children from the whole deal. So
certainly.
And, that's one concern that I hear a lot from clients who are in second marriages is how do we adequately take care of existing spouse and make sure the money goes where they want. And this is where estate planning comes in, folks, is laying the details out with a qualified person such as yourself who can basically make a roadmap of how that works, right?
Correct.
Well, one thing we'd also like to offer folks is David's put together a free report about what the new Tax Cut and Job Act can mean to you from an estate planning purpose. And we'd like to get that out to you. We can send that digitally. If you just call in 844-343-6048. I think you'll find this report very helpful. And again, no cost, no obligation. Just call 844-343-6048, or you can email me at brad@askbradwilliams.com. That's brad@askbradwilliams.com, and we'll get that report right out to you.
At Brad Williams Financial Services, we believe in innovative thinking, and we're not afraid to challenge conventional methods in our approach to managing, investing, and preserving wealth. To learn more about Brad Williams Financial Services or to set up a complimentary review,
call 844-343-6048. That's 844-343-6048.
Is your retirement plan on course? Do you even know? A good advisor is like a financial GPS because your retirement is like an airplane. It's subject to the tailwinds of economic change, the headwinds of market corrections, the turbulence of volatility, and the fuel risk of outliving your money. Most people don't realize the plane they are on is off course most of the journey, but the GPS senses this and makes the small course corrections needed before they become major navigation failures. This is what I help my clients with. Hi, my name is Brad Williams of Brad Williams Financial Services. I am my client's financial GPS that helps keep their retirement plane on course so they make it to their destination with fuel to spare. If you would like to find out what having a financial GPS is all about, call me to schedule a free 1-hour consultation to see if you are on course. Call 844-343-6048. That's 844-343-6048. All right, David, we were talking before we started about some changes that have been made in the powers of attorney. And that's probably, as much as estate planning, one of the critical issues of any when you got assets and spouses and what to do and, being able to control what happens to you. So talk about some of the changes that have been made.
Certainly. Yeah, a power of attorney is a document used to plan for incapacity. So if you're mentally unable to make decisions for yourself, you can appoint somebody to make those decisions for you. And a lot of clients that I meet with, they're a little shocked sometimes to find out that spouse does not have the authority to make financial decisions for an incapacitated spouse without the power of attorney.
Right.
And so there was a new law that was passed in Alabama. It's called the Alabama Uniform Power of Attorney Act. It became effective in January 1 of 2012. And all powers of attorney created under this law, after January 1, 2012, have some advantages over previously created powers of attorney. It'd be a good reason to update if you don't have a newer version of this power of attorney. And one of the main benefits is under the old Power of Attorney Act, banks and third parties, if they were reluctant to accept a power of attorney, there's no penalty. There was nothing that you could really force them to accept the power of attorney. And a lot of our clients would run into issues with the bank not wanting to honor the power of attorney because it was more than 5 years old.
Right.
Or it didn't mention their company by name, or it wasn't created by their attorneys at their bank. It was whatever, you make up your policy reason,
right,
not a law reason.
And I've heard of that happening on numerous occasions.
Mm-hmm. And so with the new act, you have a power of attorney and a bank is refusing to accept the power of attorney, you can now take the bank to court to get a court order that the bank accepts the power of attorney, and the bank has all the responsibility of paying the legal fees and court costs involved. So there's now a penalty. There's now a threat that you have. You can make the bank that if they don't honor the power of attorney, you're going to take them to court and they're going to have some dollars that come out of their pocket for not honoring a valid power of attorney.
Sure. Okay. And that makes total sense because like I mentioned before, I've had instances that I became aware of where they tried to use a power of attorney at a financial institution and had all kinds of roadblocks put in front of them,
mm-hmm.
from outright refusal to having to jump through a bunch of hoops.
Yep.
And so that what you're saying is this new law is going to help smooth that out.
Yes. Yeah. There'll be less hoops to jump through, and there have been less hoops to jump through from my experience with the new law because once a bank or an investment company figures out that they have some liability, for not accepting a power of attorney, they are more cooperative from my experience.
Okay. Well, that's great. That's great. And I think if my audience is getting anything, it's that planning in advance is really critically important because it's the old an ounce of prevention or a pound of cure. Having to clean up a mess of an estate that wasn't planned properly is a lot more work than setting up the proper tools like trusts and powers of attorneys. And it's not that trusts make sense for everybody, but they make sense for a lot. Would you agree with that?
Certainly. We recommend, either a will, a last will and testament, or a revocable living trust. That's an alternate to a will-based plan. But those are the two foundational ways that you can create an estate plan around. And wills make more sense for some clients, and revocable living trusts make more sense for other clients. But certainly having one or the other is highly recommended from my perspective. It's much better than having no plan at all.
Right.
Because if you die without a will, you don't have a plan of your own. you have the default plan that the state of Alabama creates for people that die without a will or without a trust. And a lot of times the default law of Alabama is not what most people would want for their plan.
Exactly. And, the key is, like I said, I've been doing this over 30 years. What's critical for me to help my clients is making sure I have a network of individuals, because I don't care how good you are. You don't know all the answers. As much as I study and go to classes all the time, I know when it comes to estate planning, I need to come to somebody like you, because you can give me the right answers. I'm not guessing. And same thing with accounting. And, having a team approach is what I find is most beneficial, so that you have resources available, because things are very complex today, aren't they?
Certainly. Yeah. The team approach to estate planning is very much what I believe in as well. It's having a good attorney, a good financial advisor, like Brad, a good accountant. You really need all three of those roles to be working together, because it can become very complicated. And there's a lot of different laws out there. The laws are changing every year, it seems like, and you got to stay on top of it. And a lot of times you're working with an experienced person that has, helped in estate planning matters previously. They have a lot of invaluable experience that you just can't gather on your own from, researching it on your own.
Yeah. And I know from my experience, when we're working with joint clients, it's so beneficial for me to be able to call you and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about proposing to this particular client. Does that conflict with your estate plan, or does that mold with it? And it's very important, because oftentimes if you're not careful, you can be working at cross purposes from each other. Would you agree with that?
Certainly. Yeah, because a lot of estate planning is making sure your ownership of assets, your beneficiary designations on your IRAs and your investments,
right,
with your assets that Brad helps manage, they have to work with your last will and testament. They have to be coordinated to work with your trust or your will. Otherwise, the plan fails. And so you got to make sure that everything is working together.
Exactly. And, a lot of people will go online and they'll create a trust at one of the online tools. And some of the key factors that are important is, if you're going to create a trust, making sure the assets are transferred to the trust. Otherwise, it's just a piece of paper.
Exactly.
And that's why it's so critical to have the right people helping in those aspects, to make sure that all that work you do to create an estate plan is not for naught because you didn't do the couple of things right.
Certainly. Yeah. Once you create a trust, you need to make sure you deed your house to the trust. Otherwise, the house is not going to be controlled by the trust. And changing bank accounts be owned by the trust, changing beneficiary designations to a trust. I see that missed a lot of times in estate plans.
Are the gifts you plan to leave behind really safe? Learn how even the most generous plans for your assets you intend to bequeath can be undone by taxes, legal snags, healthcare costs, and other avoidable pitfalls. For your free commissioned report on estate planning, call 844-343-6048 or visit us online at askbradshow.com. Learn what you need to know about how to protect your estate against excessive taxes, how to spare loved ones the cost and headache of probate, and how to avoid the most common estate planning mistakes. For your free commissioned report on estate planning, call 844-343-6048. That's 844-343-6048. Or visit us online at askbradshow.com. That's askbradshow.com. Call now for your free report. Make sure the gifts you plan to leave behind will be safe.
David, I know we talked about wills and trusts and how to use the new estate tax limits in that and the powers of attorneys. Let me ask you this, because a lot of people are sometimes unclear on this. So let's talk about, I know a lot of people who have done estate planning have credit shelter trusts. Talk about how the impact of that is.
This kind of goes back to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, increasing the estate tax exemption to $11.2 million. Also, back in 2012, the American Taxpayer Relief Act created what's called portability now for estate planning purposes. And that means that spouses can now use the unused exemption amount that a deceased spouse did not use for estate tax purposes. So in essence, if you're a married couple, you now can shelter up to $22.4 million,
right,
as opposed to just $11.2 million. And that's because of portability, and you don't need a trust to make that happen. And so some of the things that we're doing for clients that have estate plans created prior to 2012, if they have older credit shelter trust or AB trust, what they're sometimes called, marital family trust, sometimes what they're called, they're no longer necessary to achieve a good estate tax result because we have such a high exemption now. Married couples, being able to protect $22.4 million.
Okay.
So the B trust or the credit shelter trust, they have a negative impact from a capital gains tax standpoint because whatever assets are in that credit shelter trust do not receive a step up in basis upon the surviving spouse's death. So if we have appreciated real estate or appreciated stocks that are in this B trust or the credit shelter trust, and the second spouse passes away, the children, if the assets are sold, now have to pay capital gains tax where it's not necessary. And so those old credit shelter trusts and B trusts, we're modifying a lot of those trusts if assets are under the 11.2 or $22.4 million to plan for capital gains tax, since that's the more likely tax to have an effect than the estate tax.
And what I'm hearing from you is something I already knew, but maybe our listeners are getting a good feeling for it. Is it just coming up with a plan, putting it in a binder and putting it on the shelf and expecting it to work 10 or 15 years, 20 years down the road, the same way as it was designed to when you first implemented it, is not really a good plan, is it?
Certainly not. I always recommend, you plan for today. There's no guarantees, that you'll have tomorrow. And so plan for today. If you were to pass away today, where do you want your assets to go? What are the laws in effect now? And if you're alive 5 years, 10 years, 20 years on down the road, guess what you can do to your estate plan? You can always update it.
That's
you can
right,
always
modify
change it. So I always recommend you plan for today. And then as things change, whether they're the laws changing, whether they're your assets changing, whether they're your relationships with your family, they're changing. As those things change, then just plan to update your estate plan when those changes occur. That's the proper way to think about estate planning.
All right. It's interesting. When I was originally sitting down with you, I was planning on spending about 14 to 16 minutes on this of the 30-minute show. But I think there's so much information here that the listeners will benefit from that we'll just forego my part of the show.
Okay, great.
And keep going. And, the key is like I said, you don't know everything. I don't know everything about estate planning, so I need to have access to a estate planning attorney. And the same thing when it comes with taxes. But it's all got to be integrated together it's just like a car engine. Everything's got to be in tune.
Right. And I don't know investment strategies like Brad does, and I don't file tax returns like accountants do.
Right.
So you need the whole team working well together.
Again, it's the old an ounce of prevention, a pound of cure. The more you do now, the less you have to do down the road. And I think probably one of the biggest concerns I hear that I've mentioned is when you're dealing with second marriages and combined families, and why planning in that aspect is so important, because if you don't do a good job of planning, you could create family tensions and issues and strife that really wasn't there before, simply because things are ambiguous. Would you agree with that?
Certainly. And there's kind of a saying in life, seems to be especially true in estate planning. I always like to mention, money makes people funny. Seems to be especially true.
That's a good way to put it, David.
In estate planning. And for planning with blended families, especially when there's not strong relationships between the step parent and the step children, then that's where it's really important to make sure you have a good plan. Because if a blended family comes in to see me and they say they want to do what we call I love you wills, first spouse dies, they leave all assets to the surviving spouse. And then after the surviving spouse dies, then assets flow down to the kids, which are all the kids, children and stepchildren.
Right.
Well, if the first spouse dies, what can the surviving spouse do if they have a will for their estate plan?
Well, they can change it.
They can always change the will. And so it's kind of the last spouse alive kind of controls where the estate plan and all the assets are going to flow. And if there's not strong relationships between step parents and step kids, then that's where, and I've had this happen many times in my practice, where the step parent comes in and, well, I don't have a strong relationship with the step kids anymore after, husband died, after wife died. I just don't have a strong relationship, and I want to leave all the assets to the people I do have a strong relationship with,
sure,
which are their natural children. And that's exactly not what the first die spouse wanted when they came in and met with me, but that's what happens sometimes.
Well, David, I really appreciate you taking some time to come out here. And David's put together a free report about what the new Tax Cut and Job Act can mean to you from an estate planning purpose. And we'd like to get that out to you. We can send that digitally. If you had any additional questions for David, you can give us a call at 844-343-6048. And we'll put you in touch with David and get those questions answered. If you want the tax cheat sheet, we'll be happy to email or mail that to you, whichever your preference is, at 844-343-6048, or an email at brad@askbradwilliams.com. If you like the information in this show and maybe like to review it, it'll soon be up on our askbradshow.com website under the estate planning, and you'll be able to listen to that anytime you want. But I always appreciate it. Was this the third time you've been on my show, I think?
I think so.
And we always get calls because of topics you covered, and we really appreciate that. So again, David, I want to thank you for coming and hope you have a great week.
Thanks for having me, Brad.
At Brad Williams Financial Services, we understand the struggles that families and business owners face today. We want to help you develop, implement, and monitor a strategy that's designed to address your personal objectives and individual situation. To learn more about Brad Williams Financial Services or to set up a complimentary review,
call 844-343-6048. That's 844-343-6048. Taxes, taxes, taxes. It's not about how much you make. It's about how much you keep, especially in retirement, especially with a new tax law. Going forward, what will this mean for you and your taxes? Brad Williams has created a tax cheat sheet. It's a 2-page reference guide on the new tax bill and how it may affect you. For your free tax cheat sheet, give Brad a call at 844-343-6048. That's 844-343-6048. Or visit AskBradShow.com. That's AskBradShow.com.
Is your retirement plan on course? Do you even know? A good advisor is like a financial GPS because your retirement is like an airplane. It's subject to the tailwinds of economic change, the headwinds of market corrections, the turbulence of volatility, and the fuel risk of outliving your money. Most people don't realize the plane they are on is off course most of the journey, but the GPS senses this and makes the small course corrections needed before they become major navigation failures. This is what I help my clients with. Hi, my name is Brad Williams of Brad Williams Financial Services. I am my client's financial GPS that helps keep their retirement plane on course so they make it to their destination with fuel to spare. If you would like to find out what having a financial GPS is all about, call me to schedule a free 1-hour consultation to see if you are on course. Call 844-343-6048. That's 844-343-6048. Good morning. What is the number one cause of bankruptcy for those who are 65 and over in the United States today? Here's a clue. It's not living too long with the amount you've saved. A lot of you probably know that. You hear it a lot. Many probably don't. You might think it's outliving your money because you hadn't saved enough, things like that. But there was a recent article in Forbes magazine, and it showed that medical debt is the number one source of personal bankruptcy filing in the United States. And people who are 65 and older now make up roughly 8% of bankruptcy filers. And that's up from 2008. Now, the author attributes the increase to a few factors. And for one, he said the recession of 2008 hit the over 65 demographic pretty hard. Now, we all remember what that was like, and it did. It hit a lot of people really hard. A lot of people had to go back to work because they saw a substantial drop in their assets. But those who were receiving medical care, were hit pretty hard as well. In some states can garnish your disposable net monthly income. I think one of the key things that's important to consider is with the fact that most wives outlive their husbands. And in many cases, not all cases, because I've been in practice for over 30 years, I see varying degrees of change in that. But for the most part, the men oversee the family's finances, their investments. They were primarily the larger wage earner. Again, not in all cases, but in most, at least in my experience. So what happens, a lack of financial literacy in the spouse that's not involved can lead many women who are survivors, or even men if the woman was handling the finances, into bankruptcy court. Now, today, we're going to talk about what that is, okay? Now, we said medical debt. What I'm really talking about is long-term care issues. Everybody's heard all the talk about long-term care. It's a buzzword. And, I could sit here and reel off all kinds of boring statistics. You probably get, especially if somebody's trying to sell you a long-term care policy. When this is talked about, people always throw out the numbers. But what I told you when we opened the show is that I was going to show you some solutions. And I'm going to keep that promise. And I'm going to show you how to prepare for this threat and why it's a threat to your money and your family. Because in reality, think about it. Long-term care is not just a threat to your pocketbook. It's a threat to your whole family, their well-being and quality of life. Because when you are needing constant care, it not only affects your wife, it affects your children and everyone close to you. I mean, look, folks, you know the story. Most of the people listening to this show are not children. They've experienced family, friends, maybe church members who have had long-term care experience, whether it's an accident or whether a stroke or some other health issue that is debilitating, and it requires them to need help with what are called activities of daily living. And when you're talking about long-term care, you got to have at least a cursory understanding of what that is. And how that is judged is there are 6 basic activities of daily living: bathing, dressing, eating, toileting, continence, and transferring. Okay. Bathing, you need help bathing. It's not that maybe you can't do it yourself, but you may need help doing it. Same with toileting. Transferring, you need some kind of help. Even with eating, it's not that you need somebody to feed you. It's maybe you can't prepare it for yourself anymore. But these are the basics. And so we've all experienced that. We've seen it. I know I have. Of my grandparents on my mother's side, of course, my grandfather died when my mother was about 2, so I never knew him. But my grandmother lived to 99 3/4. And the last really 12 years of her life, she was cared for she had 10 children. And so 2 or 3 of them, my mother included, spent time taking care of her. My grandparents on my father's side, my grandmother had Alzheimer's. That lasted about 7 years. 2 of them weren't too bad, but the last 5 were pretty tough. And at that point, my grandfather needed care because his diabetes had caused him to lose a leg, and then the other one as well. And so he was wheelchair bound. So, that was a family issue. The family took care of it. And, things are different for most people today. And the reason is that family support network just isn't there for most people. We've got 2 income earners that are working. Oftentimes you've got what they call the sandwich generation where, they're caring for parents and for grandchildren. So there's a lot of issues there. So the question then comes back to, as I told you I was going to help you with, is show you some real solutions to this problem. And when we come back, I'm going to do just that. So we're going to talk about some real solutions.
Have you missed any of today's show? Would you like to listen to past shows? We've got you covered 24/7. Visit AskBradShow.com. That's AskBradShow.com.
Welcome back. We've been talking about long-term care. I mentioned my personal family experience with it. I know everyone out there in my listening audience has had some experience with it, directly or indirectly. So it's there. The main thing to remember is it is a real and substantial threat to your finances, to your life, to your well-being, to your family's well-being and their happiness. So you got to admit it. And that's the first step. You know, they say that admitting you have an issue is the first step to fixing it. Well, we all have the issue. And one thing about my career, I've been blessed with 31 plus years in the industry. And when I first got in, I primarily was mom and pop life insurance, kitchen table type meetings. And as I graduated, helping business owners with some of their planning and investments. Due to some family issues that I mentioned earlier, I realized long-term care was an issue and had an opportunity to work for a group that's all they did. And so for a while, that's what I specialized in, is designing long-term care plans for people. And it really opened my eyes to many different things. But one of the big things I saw was that oftentimes you'd have someone want you to come talk to them about that, and there'd be one spouse that would just not admit that there was an issue there. Now, the answer is not necessarily long-term care insurance, but the first step to finding the answer is understanding you got a problem. And the problem is, unless you're mega wealthy, that you may run out of money taking care of one of you in retirement if you've got long-term care issues. Because like I said, when the rubber meets the road, it's not whether you have long-term care insurance. It's if you have a long-term care issue, how are you going to pay for it? That's key. How are you going to pay for it? We're going to get into, as I mentioned, I promised you solutions. Believe me, folks, I'm getting to them. You know, the first thing would be to self-insure. That's the first solution to the problem. Now, the key there is, do you have enough assets to self-insure? Fortunately, some do. In my practice, as we address that issue, you know, part of my process is going through Social Security, making sure that's maximized, looking at health care issues, you know, income and retirement, investment planning and allocation, all that. But oftentimes, as you're going through that discovery process, you find out, well, they pretty much can take care of that threat themselves. And so that's good. They're in a good position. The problem is that's really a relatively small percentage of at least the people I've seen in my career. So the second way to pay for long-term care would, of course, be spend everything down and let the state pay for it. All right. And yeah, that's an option for some. Not a great plan, but it's out there. I mean, Medicaid's there waiting for a nursing home, although it pays very little for anything else. And you pretty much have to be broke. The spouse has got to spend, you know, I'm not going to get into all those details, but you got to spend down everything. And there's only a few assets a stay-at-home spouse can keep. In the state of Alabama, there are very few creative ways to get around that. In some states, the way their laws are written, you can do some, you know, Medicaid-friendly annuities and things like that to preserve assets. Not in Alabama, folks. We have a pretty strict Medicaid rules. And basically, it's a federally funded program, and then it's administered by the state and partially funded by the state. So the key is, do you want the state taking care of you? Because they're going to send you where they have an open bed. Again, this may be an option for some people. I remember back in my long-term care days, when that's all I did, I had one lady that called me. She lived in a modest apartment, and I went out and met with her, and she had a real fear of long-term care. She thought that was just the most terrible thing, and she didn't want to be subject to all those rules and what the state taking care of her, and she wanted to buy a long-term care policy. Well, quite frankly, she didn't have the assets to protect. So there was really no reason to get it except for controlling where she was going to get care. And her premiums would have really put a dent in her lifestyle. And I just flat out told her, ma'am, as much as you want this, you don't really need this, because, you know, long-term care insurance is when you have something to protect, assets to protect. I said, as terrible as it sounds, your option is the state. And after a while, she agreed with me, and we parted company friends. And, you know, that's the key, folks. It's not that somebody tells you, well, this solution's for you, but what is the right solution for you? Folks, appreciate you listening to my show. I'll have to say the results we got, the calls we got, and the inquiries from our beneficiary directory show were overwhelming. And so in view of that, we're going to extend that free offer. I've got some more books and workbooks. I've got 3 sets of a book and a workbook, $45 retail value on Amazon. It is a great tool for making sure your assets go to the places you want them to go to. Just give us a call, 844-343-6048. That's 844-343-6048. And we'll tell you how you can get your beneficiary directory and beneficiary directory workbook. Again, folks, a great tool. I use it in my practice. It really makes you think about things and plan in advance so you don't leave a mess for those who come after you.
Thanks for listening to our show today. In retirement, you only get one chance to get it right, and we know that proper information leads to informed decisions. And that's why we hold free informational workshops in our area every month. Topics like Social Security, RMDs, the latest retirement tax strategies, IRAs, estate planning, and so much more. For dates and times of the next free workshop in your area, call 844-343-6048. That's 844-343-6048.
All right, now getting back into real life solutions. We talked about self-funding. That works for some. Having the state do it if you really don't have any assets to protect. Some people, their only primary asset is the equity in their home. And believe it or not, a reverse mortgage can be a good solution. Now, you're going to hear all kinds of things, pro and con, about reverse mortgages. And like I say about many things, beware people who automatically put down a particular financial product because it's out there because there's a niche for it. There's a need for it. And reverse mortgages can be a real lifesaver for some. They may not fit you. Probably the bulk of people, they don't fit. But those that they do fit, they are a lifesaver. And that could be the way that you're able to stay at home by tapping into your equity. The regulations have changed on that. And, there's some good things that have happened in that market. So just think about that. That's a possible solution. Now, getting into what is considered the traditional long-term care insurance world. For many years, that was the go-to. That was the starting place, and that's where most people ended up. And the way a traditional long-term care insurance plan works is it's kind of like renter's insurance. You pay premiums, you have protection as long as you pay the premiums. You continue to pay premiums for life. And if you go on claim, in most cases, you don't pay premiums. Some would say it's a little complicated. It's actually fairly simple. It's 4 primary things you look at: your daily or monthly benefit, which is the money you would get out of it in the event you had a covered health issue. You've got the benefit period, which is how long that would last. And it used to be you get it anywhere from 2 years to unlimited. Well, most companies don't even get anywhere close to unlimited plans anymore. But I was fortunate. I got one a long time ago, 20 years ago. But then you've got your elimination period, which is kind of like a deductible. It's usually a dollar amount or a time amount, like 30, 60, 90 days. And you pay for your own care until you get to that trigger, and then it pays. And then something else that can be added is an inflation factor, which will help keep your daily benefit or monthly benefit in line with today's costs as costs rise. So, you got your daily monthly benefit, your benefit period, your elimination period, and then, of course, an inflation factor. Now, let me tell you what's changed about that. A lot, folks, a lot. Because not only did 2008 change the way you need to invest and allocate for retirement, it actually changed long-term care substantially. Because when interest rates came down, when the Federal Reserve took us down from an average of 4.5% for the 10-year Treasury which is what a lot of insurance companies and banks, for that matter, base their product offerings because of what they can invest in treasuries and how that affects the bond markets. And, insurance companies are financial intermediaries. They take your money in premiums, they invest them, they make money on the difference. And oftentimes, even with a slightly unprofitable product, insurance companies can make money on the premium flow. Well, the problem is that I think it got as low as 1.39. I think it was in 2012. I don't have my charts in front of me, but you cannot make money as an insurance company when 10-year treasury rates are that low. And so we saw a substantial downward pressure on insurance companies' profits in this line of business because there was no margin. They were losing money. You had claims that they probably had not actuarially done the right work on at that point. And so claims were higher than normal. And another big factor, which is kind of interesting, is that insurance companies will build in what's called a lapse rate to their products, which means that they know, after a certain period of time that a certain amount of people are going to drop their policy without ever having a claim. In the 6th year, they're going to have this, and they're pretty good at those type of computations. Well, what they're finding is that people weren't lapsing their policies in the numbers they expected. They recognized the need for that product and they kept their policies. So what did that mean? Well, we're going to talk about that when we get back to the break, and we're going to look at a couple other solutions and talk more about that.
So, how's this latest stock market roller coaster ride treating you? You've worked too long and too hard, scrimping and saving for retirement to have it exposed to this market volatility or gobbled up by some retirement spend-down scheme. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, hoping for different results. For your free, no obligation, no more volatility information kit, be one of our first 10 listeners to call 844-343-6048 or visit us online at AskBradShow.com. It's time to get off the roller coaster and get serious about how you're planning for retirement using tools and strategies designed to generate steady, predictable income so you may have the retirement you've worked so long and so hard for. For your free, no obligation, no more volatility information kit, be one of our first 10 listeners to call 844-343-6048. That's 844-343-6048. Or visit us online at AskBradShow.com. That's AskBradShow.com.
All right, as we come back, we were talking about traditional long-term care insurance, and I was talking about how 2008 changed the industry. And some of the substantial ways it did, of course, was, interest rates changed, and that really impacted the insurance company's profitability. And then, of course, claims and lapse ratios impacted them even more on top of that. And what we saw was an exit from the industry of a lot of companies that were offering long-term care. Big names just decided they weren't going to write them anymore. Now, that doesn't mean they walked away from their book of business. They're still managing their books of business, but they're not writing any new policies. And that's big because in the past, what they had always done is when they needed to raise premiums, they typically passed it on to the new policy. So they issued one, and then if they saw they needed to raise rates, they'd issue it in another. And they couldn't do that anymore because they have no new books. So the amount of companies left in that industry are very limited in number, and it is very tough getting insured because they only want the best to make up for all their past negative experiences. So traditional long-term care insurance may be a solution for you. Only a professional who can go through all those details like myself can help you, but that's a big issue. So insurance companies, they're always looking at how to enhance what they offer, just like car companies or anybody else. And so they started looking, okay, what about asset-based care? And what I mean by that is using a lump sum, what I call when people have lazy money that's not doing much for them. And give you a good example. I had a lady come in years ago, which really opened my eyes to this. And she had $150,000 in a CD. and that was her long-term care fund. And if she didn't use it, the money was already designated on a payable on death to her daughters. And boom, if she needed it, it was there. If she didn't, it got passed on. Well, what I showed her is how to magnify and leverage that with an asset-based care. And she liked that idea because she got a lot more long-term care out of it. And she got some other benefits. So with an asset-based care, what you do is you basically pledge your money in an annuity, or could be a life insurance policy where you're leveraging that lump sum to get you either quite a bit of additional long-term care benefit or long-term care benefit. And in addition to that, some life insurance. So no matter what happens to you, if you die, you get a big payment, tax-free. If you live, you have the long-term care if you need it. And if you want, you can cash it out at some point in the future and take your gains out of it and do something else with it. So it gives you flexibility and it gives you other options. Another one that's really becoming more popular is the life insurance only type based, where you've got life insurance policy that has a percentage of your long-term care benefit. The percentage of the death benefit, I should say, is your long-term care benefit. Some of them combine life insurance and annuities. And I know that all that sounds complicated, but if you know what you're doing, you know when they apply. And the one thing that a lot of people like about that option is that you can use qualified money. That is money in an IRA or a 401k, and leverage that because, a lot of people have most of their assets in retirement plans. They don't have it just sitting in the bank. So some of these other alternatives really didn't help them because they had limited places to get their money. And the asset-based care that allows qualified money is a very viable solution to the long-term care problem. So as we're winding down, let me kind of close out with a few thoughts. Your long-term care is a threat. It's an issue, folks. You got to address it one way or another. Even if you look at it, realize, hey, these are the numbers, I'll live with it. Okay, you've at least looked at it, but you got to at least look at it. I also would suggest another thing is oftentimes people go to the insurance agent or whatever and ask for help. When my clients come in and they're talking about trusts, and I don't try to practice law, but I give them some cursory knowledge of trusts and how they might apply to their situation, since I typically either refer them to a lawyer or tell them, go talk to him, but he's probably going to tell you don't need one, is if you're going to talk to an attorney about a trust, don't go to a jack of all trades attorney. Go to one that specializes in estate planning and trusts, because they know all the nuances and they know the issues that can be faced with that. And that's important. Well, the same thing is true when you're doing your long-term care planning. Don't just necessarily go the guy that does your home, your boats, your cars to have him do that planning where he's got to search for the application in his office. Go to somebody who understands the details of these type of products. Whether you call me or not is irrelevant. If you've got the problem, you need to solve it. And that's the important thing, is solving the problem. And that's why I look at my place here on the radio. Yeah, I do get some clients from my radio show, but I like to give back to the community, give them information. Whether you ever call me or not is not important. It's that you listen to what I say and you implement these things, or at least explore them to find out whether they apply to you or not. So I guess the gist of what I'm saying in this last segment is, like they tell you on TV, don't try this at home, folks. These are trained professionals. So as I close out the show, again, I want to thank everyone for listening. I really appreciate the responses we're getting. And as I mentioned before on our beneficiary directory plan, I'm putting 3 up again because we had such a response when we did that show, that if you're the first 3 callers at 844-343-6048, that's 844-343-6048. We'll tell you how you can get it. Have a great week and talk to you soon.
That's all the time we have for today. To learn more about Brad Williams Financial Services or to set up a complimentary review,
call 844-343-6048. That's 844 888-343-6048.
Investment advisory services offered through Sound Income Strategies, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisory firm. Brad Williams Financial Services and Sound Income Strategies, LLC are not associated entities.